Hi guys, welcome back. This is going to be a project video. It's going to be a little bit different than we usually do, but we are going to build a full project. We're going to do a full custom belt. I've got a number of belts here on our clipboard that I need to get done for some real good customers. So I thought it was a great opportunity just to kind of refresh. We're kind of being sure that we were kind of updating and kind of revisiting some of the things that we did in videos years ago, because some of you guys may not have run across those, may be new to the channel. So we're going to go ahead and build. Everybody likes to build belts. Belts are great projects. And now we have also our belt pattern book that we came out with. It's got a number of different belt patterns in there. So we're going to use this in this video to build just, I've got custom belts to build, but we're going to build one stock belt for the retail floor, and I'll film that entire process and we'll show you what we do. If you've already seen this, it'll be a new little refresher, but just wanted to kind of touch on it again. Like I said, we've got so many videos on there, and a lot of people don't go digging, and they may not have seen the older one that we did where I show my whole process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get our strip, and we're going to get this sized for the size belt that we want to build for the belt rack out there on the retail floor. All right, so I'm going to size one belt. I'm just going to do this belt at a 36. That's pretty popular. So you're going to get the measurement from the customer, the bend to the hole they wear it in. Doesn't matter if it's an added hole, an extra hole, one on the end, the middle, it doesn't matter. Whichever hole they're wearing it with, a type of buckle they're wearing it with, or going to wear it with, you have them measure their existing belt because that currently fits. And then you just measure from the bend of where it goes around the buckle to the hole that they're in with that buckle. And then we're going to say, okay, they gave us a 36. So that's what we need this belt to be. So what we're going to do first on this strip is I'm going to find the butt. That's usually very easy to see because, as you can see here, this is the neck. You can see a little bit of that grain separation. You can see a little bit of that on the neck side, and the butt side is nice and firm. You can see the back looks a little bit better. So that's going to be our tip end, or our billet end. That's where the holes are going to be for the buckle to go into. So we always want that to the right. If you will get into the habit of always setting your belt down left to right, buckle on your left, tip on the right, you will never have the issue of putting a name in the back of the belt upside down or their initial or brand upside down. I don't care if you're antiquing, oiling, tooling, whatever you're doing, every time you set this belt down, you need to set it down, buckle to your left, tip to the right. Just get into that habit, that etiquette habit there in the shop, and you'll never accidentally, because I've done it, everybody on here that's watched has done it, every master craftsman has done it. You get a belt done and you realize you put the name or the initials upside down. So just get in that habit, left to right, buckle on the left, tip on the right. So what we're going to do first is, this is our tip end, right? It's on the right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do a 7-inch tip on this belt, and so I'm going to put a mark here at 7 inches. And I'm going to come over here, and from that mark, that's my center hole. That's where the center hole of this belt's going to be. So from that mark, I'm now going to put a mark at 36 inches. That's where the center of our back punch is going to be. That's where the fold's going to be. That's where it'll fold around the buckle. Then we need some to fold over too. Don't cut that off, because now your belt's short. So what I use is 3.5 inches. You could certainly use 3. You could use 2. I don't really care. It doesn't matter. I just always have used 3.5 because it leaves me enough room to set those snaps in case there's a keeper. Some buckles will have a keeper with them, and you need those snaps far enough apart where the keeper will fit in there. So I use 3.5. Works good for me on these belts. A quicker way of doing that is just to add 10.5 inches, because we just added 3.5 and 7 down here for the tip. So that's 10.5 inches together. So if you take 36, which is their measurement, and just add 10.5 inches, that'll give you 46.5. So we'll check that measurement, 46.5 inches. So when you're cutting belts out, if you're doing a bunch of them and you do them real fast, you can just take their measurement they gave you, add 10.5 inches, cut that belt that length. So now here's our belt. It's the right length. When we finish this belt, it's going to be the right size. Now right here on this fold, this is our fold end. Remember where our buckle's going to be. It's always going to be on our left. I'm going to write on here stock, because this is just going to be a stock belt. What I'll usually do though is I'll write the person's name. So say the last name's Martin. I'll put Martin on there. If their last name's Smith, I'll write Smith, whatever it is. And that way when I get 10 of these cut during, say, Christmas time, I got them all piled up, I can just grab it, read whose it is, and I know it's already their size. Now, always check your measurements when you sit down to tool the belt to make sure that you didn't make a mistake, but you always want to check, double check, and all that. So, but I'll do that, and I'll pitch it to the side. I'll grab the next one. We add 10.5 inches to their size. we'll cut it to the length and it'll fit them correctly. So some of you already might know, but I add poster board to our belts. This is just a sheet of poster board. We buy it by the box on Amazon for different various projects. We've used it in a bunch of other projects as far as putting that in to add a little bit of a stiffener. So it's gonna add a little body to this belt and keep the stretch to a minimum so the belt won't stretch as much over time. It also will keep the tooling from stretching the belt. When we go to floral carving this belt, it's not gonna stretch at all. Now, if you don't want to use poster board, you could definitely use blue painter's tape. You can also just pre-stretch your belt by using a glass and going ahead and misting that down a little bit and glassing that leather. I prefer not to do that because I don't like what it does to the leather as far as for the grain and stuff. I think it tightens it up a little bit too much, and just kind of got away from doing any of that stuff, but I prefer the poster board. So what I've got is just a very simple little strip ease. It's just a little strap cutter, small one, and I've got it set at 1 1/8 inch. So that's gonna leave us a little bit. This is an 1.5 inch belt. It'll leave us just a little bit on each side there where you won't see the poster board in your final product along the edge. So then we'll just strip this up into a bunch of strips, and then we'll be able to go ahead and line these with that. All right, so we've gotten our belt strip here. It's cut to length. We've got our poster board pieces cut out. First thing we're gonna do on this belt strip here, it's ready, it's the size we need it, so we'll take our strap in punch, and you can use whichever one you want. You can cut it at a taper. I see a lot of guys doing that. You can do whatever you want there. But we're just gonna put a tip on that belt that looks nice, and then we'll do the same to the other side for the fold over. Okay, always setting our belt down left to right. Move that cutting pad. And so there's our strip. And so first thing I want to do is on the bend end down here, I'm going to come in 7 inches and put a mark, because we don't need the paper to go all through the bend. We're going to thin this bend down. That's going to be where the fold over is, so we don't need that paper there at all. So now we'll just take our 1 1/8 inch strip of paper, and we're just going to point one end, and that'll be for right there. And so we'll just glue that in. This will stay in all the way to the final belt. It will stay in the belt. That's going to add some body to this, keep the belt from stretching as much. It's acting as a stiffener, and a lot of times your stiffener, if you hear people talking about stiffeners in leather work, it's a lot of times just going to be some type of cardboard or poster board, depending on the project. So we're just going to put some glue on there. We'll let that set up for just a minute, and then we'll glue that in. All right, so we let our glue set up. I did put 2 coats on here. Most of the time I will use 2 coats of glue, and we'll just stick that right down the center of the belt. Press that on real nice. Now we'll take another strip, go from our mark that we made at 7 inches, and we'll just tear that piece off. And now we'll glue those up and get those set. So I just overlap them just a little bit. I don't want to not overlap them because I don't want to break right there in the belt, a break in that poster board. You want to be sure that overlaps just a little bit, not enough to make a bump, but just enough to where there's not a break in the joint right there, because that belt will bend a bunch right there if you don't do that. But anyway, we'll let this glue set up, put on a second coat, and we'll come back and glue that down. All right, so I stuck our middle piece in here, or our little piece here that we had that was short. We went ahead and put that in, did a little bit of overlap right there just so we don't have a break in the poster board. If it's got a little bit of a bump and you want to sand that off, you certainly can. I've never had a problem with just leaving that there. It's not really enough to even worry about. But now that belt is ready to go. I don't do any thinning here on the bend piece until I'm done with the belt and ready to line it up or get it lined and sewn and all that stuff. So we'll go ahead and wait to do that. But now we'll go over to the tooling bench, and we're going to lay out a floral pattern on this belt and get it all tooled, and then we'll go to the dye and the antiquing and all that stuff. Okay, so we've gotten our belt prepped and ready for tooling. So we're going to go ahead and, like I said, we're going to just kind of show this in here just because this is one of our new books that we came out with. A lot of y'all have used a lot of our belt patterns on from our website that we've sold for years and years. And this is just kind of a whole grouping of new belt patterns that we've offered. And there's 1.5 inch patterns in here. There's some 1 3/4 patterns in here, as well as the tapered and Ranger billet patterns here if you do want to do floral on some of those 1 inch and 3/4 inch tapers. We do have some of those in there, but I'm going to go in here, we're going to pick out a pattern, and I'm just going to kind of show pretty straightforward, just like any other pattern book or anything we do. I'm going to go ahead and do this pattern right here on this particular belt because I want to make this belt kind of match the saddle that we did a couple years ago with the wildlife theme, and this is the type of pattern that we did on that saddle. And so we're going to do a belt with that on there. And so as you can see on this book, you've got a tooled photo to the left, so that shows an actual photo of the panel that I tooled so that you can see kind of how I tooled them. You know, give yourself liberty to do whatever you want to do when you're tooling these patterns, but this just kind of gives you an example of how I would approach tooling these. You can use those as a reference. And then we've got the line art right here. And so what I'll do is I've just got a piece of Mylar here, or a piece of tracing film, whatever you're going to use to transfer your pattern, and we're just going to trace off this pattern. These are repeat patterns, so this end here will match up with this end. Once we trace this section off onto the belt, we'll just move it down. I'll show you that, but we'll get this traced off right quick. All right, so now we've gotten our pattern piece made that now we can transfer that to our leather. So we're done with this book. Now if you're using one of these patterns over and over again, and it's a popular one for you in your business to where a lot of customers pick it out, or you just really enjoy tooling it, I would suggest taking this and making a tap off of it, and that way you don't have to trace it every time. You can actually just use the tap off, and it'll be much faster to transfer this. We have a video showing how to do tap offs, and we may revisit that as well in the future, but you can very easily take one of those drop offs from cutting the belt out, and you can make yourself a tap off and then be able to transfer that pattern very quickly onto a belt. Okay, so I brought my belt blank over here for the belt that we're going to build, and what I want to do on this side here is we want to put, always set your belt down left to right like we talked about, but this is going to be the buckle side. I'm going to put a mark at 7 inches. That's where I want my tooling to start. So we're going to start our tooling right there, 7 inches from the end. That 7 inches comes from the 3.5 that makes the bend. And so what we're going to do is trace it out. Now when you trace out any pattern, you'll notice I've got my lines on here. This is our actual belt. These other two in the middle are the border line. Do not trace the border line. We will set the border based on the project. You don't ever want to trace these border lines and trust those when you're transferring a pattern. You can make little reference marks to know how wide to make the border, but let's set that border true with a pair of wing dividers. That way it's correct, because if you trust what you trace, it's going to have wobbles in it for one, no matter how hard you try to trace that perfectly. But then also it could vary a little bit if my draw gauge is set a little bit narrower or a little bit wider. And so we want to be sure and set our border true the way we want it. So we'll just hold that pattern on there, and we'll trace all of these lines and get this pattern traced and transferred. And now we've got our pattern where it ends right there with that leaf. So now this side will just butt right up to it. This is what you would call a repeating belt pattern. So you just have to draw, if you're drawing your own patterns, just draw you a short little section of it that meets up end to end. And then once you kind of get the one little section drawn up, you can do a belt of any length from that point on. Most people will do belts that way. You can do them where you draw the entire belt, but it's just a little more time consuming. Okay, now we're going to set our wing dividers at the proper width for our border. I'm going to tighten mine up just a hair. And that's going to be about right. So now we'll just run around that belt. And then here we're just going to add a couple little vines to kind of end the tip of this belt right here, because we have that little dead space right there. You can always fine tune these, especially at these transitions where these things come together. Depending on your belt and what you're doing, you might need to add a line or two here or there to kind of make sure everything kind of fits together just the way you want it. Okay. And then before I carve it, when I get my maker stamp, this is the one I use on all my belts. And first I'm gonna bring this where it pops out just a hair. Bring this down. So right there is where I'm gonna put my stamp. Okay. And now all that vine work's just coming out of that maker stamp basically. So now we're ready to get this carved. And so I will give it just another little misting. And we'll get to carving this right up. And I'm gonna carve my border lines first. Okay, so we got our belt carved up, and so now we'll start the tooling. I get a lot of questions on this. It's just a push beveler. This is an old Osborne push beveler. You can get these from Barry King. He does make some. Some other folks make them too, and you can find them. They've just got a beveled head on there, and you can just push it along, and it works great for borders. It's pretty much the only place I ever use it is just on borders and things. I'll go through there just a little quicker than having to use a regular stamp beveler. But anyway, we'll get the tooling started on this. We're not going to show it all, but we'll show a good portion of the tooling, and we'll get this belt tooled up. All right, guys, so we've gotten our belt tooled. Everything's tooled up. I've given this belt enough time to dry. Just kind of in the shop, we always try not to oil our belts or any project really that you're working on if it's still a little damp from tooling. So I like to give that, if I can, over the evening or maybe the whole afternoon to really dry out, make sure that it's dry. Don't know that it would affect anything, but that's what I like to do. Then we're gonna get some oil here. I am using the Duff's leather conditioning oil in this project. I've been using it now for quite a while. Most of y'all know that. We've used it in our classes and things like that. Olive oil is absolutely fine. I keep that in the shop as well. You know, it's whatever oil you want to use, but I like this Duff's. Seems a little bit more forgiving. It takes a little bit more work to get it over darkened even than olive oil, and that's why I switched to olive oil years ago. But either one is good. Use whatever oil you want to use. This is just what I've been playing with lately, and good company, good man, and I like his product. So that's what we've been playing with and doing. But we're going to just put a nice little light coat of oil on here. When you're building belts, remember you're dealing with 9-10 ounce leather. If you want a lighter colored belt, you want to really put this is a pretty good little decent coat I'm putting on here because I want it to have a little bit of tone to it, a little bit of color. But if you're wanting like a really what we call a honey finish, I'm going to really just rake this off on this metal grate here where I have very little oil at all in this pad, and I'm just going to give it just a touch of oil just because I feel like it needs to have some oil if you're dealing with veg. But anyway, we'll put that on there. We're going to let this set for probably an hour, maybe not even that long. I may go ahead and give it a second coat, but we're just trying to get a good base tone color, and then we'll be ready to seal this and antique it. Is about all we're going to do to this particular belt here in this video. And so we'll come back here in a little bit and see what kind of color we get. So we've given the oil a good amount of time to dry. It's probably been an hour and a half. I just want to let it soak in so that it looks nice and even. And you can see how we don't have any kind of dark spots or anywhere where it's too light or anything like that. That oil went in nice and even. Olive oil, Duff's leather conditioning oil, any of those will do that as far as keeping it nice and even. Just use a nice clean oil, whatever you want to use. I even know people that have really good luck with like a peanut oil or a vegetable oil even. But neat's foot oil for me, historically, back in the day, used to give us a lot of splotchy, dark and light variations throughout the belt. And so we switched to olive oil many, many years ago. So, and like I said, here recently been using the Duff stuff. But whatever oil you like, but just experiment, play around. Try some different oils, but I think if you're working in veg tan leather, you do need to put at least a little bit of oil in there before you seal it. So if we were going to do any kind of dye work or paint work or anything like that, we would do that before the oiling and before we antique or anything else. So that would have already been done. This belt is not going to be dyed. It's not going to be painted. There's nothing else going on here. We're just going to simply antique it. And so we went ahead and oiled it, but you would always do that before you oil, and then you'd oil. And then you'd be at this step, which is where we're going to seal this belt for antiquing with tan coat. Tan coat is my preferred resist. You could definitely use Resolene. You could use the Sheridan finish. If you got some old cans of neat lac or any of that kind of stuff, you could certainly use anything you would like to use. Super Sheen, any of that kind of stuff will work. I just prefer tan coat for the work that we do. And so that's what we're going to use. And that is also going to be my resist for our antique. So I'm just going to take a wool pad here. We have these available occasionally, but right now here lately I haven't had any. But just some sheepskin, trim up your edges a little bit and stuff so you don't get a bunch of fuzzies. And then we're just going to put a nice good coat on this belt. Now when you're putting finish on, be sure that your finish isn't pooling up a bunch. You don't want big old pools of this tan coat down in your tooling. You want to kind of move that around and get it distributed evenly so there's not a big globby pool of it inside your tooling. That can cause some issues later as far as just being unsightly. It's not going to hurt the leather, it just doesn't look very professional. You want to be sure you get it on there even, move around to a cleaner part of the pad, and just be sure you're moving that around so you don't have any pooling. And so you can see the richness of color in that belt there and how that color looks even more even than it did before the finish. And what the resist is going to do, one, this is also our top coat or our final coat for this belt. After this dries, we could go ahead and line it, sew it, finish it up, send it out the door, just looking just like that. I like to antique everything, so we're going to go one step further. But this is technically could be your end finish right here. Once this dries, you go ahead and put this belt together. But we're going to let that dry and set up really good, probably an hour or so. Overnight if you want to, it doesn't matter. But we just want to be sure it's nice and dry before we go to the antiquing step. Okay, so we've given this belt plenty of time to dry. The tin coat is dry on here. It's not tacky at all. It's ready to go. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab us some antique. I like to use the Five Beans dark brown or medium brown if they're out of the dark brown, but the dark brown is my preference, and I like to use the paste. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little bit out here on our table. Now, if you don't have, right now we've had some classes in here, and so I don't really have a dedicated finishing table in here. And so what we do is I put paper on our bigger benches here, our work tables, just so that when we're dyeing, we're gluing, all that, we've got plenty of room for everybody to work. But you can certainly do that in your shop, is just take a bench, put some paper down, put some cardboard down. That'll just help. When it gets super, super nasty, you can just throw it away. And so it works out perfect. We can just put that right there on the table. And then I'm gonna get one of these sheepskin pads, and we're just gonna trim that up just a little bit. And so I just wanna trim it up so it doesn't have quite as many of the little fuzzies on there. And so we'll just get a little bit of this antique here on the pad. You can also use a dauber for this. You can use a sponge. You can use a toothbrush. I've seen some people using some toothbrushes. It's probably a pretty cool idea. And we're just going to work this in to the tooling. And you want to be sure and go in little circles, both directions, all around. Just move that stuff around in the tooling, because you want that antique paste to get worked down into all the cuts and crevices in your background and your decorative cuts and all of that stuff. It's just going to highlight and accent and add a little contrast to this tooling. And so we do have a video devoted to antiquing. That's an older video that we did many years ago that you could certainly go back and reference. But it's pretty straightforward. Some people like to use the gel. I'm not a big fan of it. I've played with it a little bit, but I have very limited experience with the gel. I'm kind of a old school when it comes to that. I like to stick with this paste. I can kind of control the consistency of it and I know how it's going to react, so I don't have to really worry about it. And so what you're looking for is make sure you don't have any holidays in there, any areas that you missed. You want to be sure all the cuts have antique work down in there. So once I work the antique in, I go immediately and take it off. I don't leave it on there. I get a lot of questions from people that'll call or email us, and they'll say, I'm having trouble with my antiquing and the antique is falling out. The antique, the only reason it should be falling out, or it could fall out, is if you leave too much on there. So if you have that problem, you're leaving far too much antique in your work. You shouldn't have blobs of antique down in your tooling. That is not, that's not what it's designed for. It's never going to dry hard. It's never going to cure. It will fall out. It's not supposed to stay in there. It's supposed to be, it's got to have some texture for a thin bit of that to hang on to, and then get lightly sealed in with your top coat. So if you're having that issue, just from my opinion, you need to take more off. You're leaving too much on there. When I antique, I'm acting like I want to get it all off, because I don't want to see dirty antique down in there where it just looks messy. We want to have that a nice clean finish that's highlighted with the antique of choice, right? And so I just want to address that, because I do get that question a lot. And so you can see how much I've left in there, which isn't a whole lot. There's no big old blobs of it anywhere. There's not a big caked portion in there. If you want more contrast in your tooling, more contrast in your antiquing, a little more grit, kind of, so to speak, then use coarser grain tools tools with texture, if you're using smooth pear shaders, bevelers, and that sort of thing, it's not gonna hold antique very well. You've gotta have something with some texture on it, like sanding something with sandpaper before you paint it. You're giving it something to bind to. But I can leave this blob of antique sitting on here, this table for a week, and I can come back here and I can wipe it off. It's gonna harden up a little bit, but it's crumbly and it just gets nasty. It does not harden up like an epoxy cure. It's not gonna stay on there. So that's just kind of a misconception out there, and I see that a lot in work, is that people will want that contrasty look, and there's ways to get that in your tooling and stuff like that. But the antiquing, you're limited with what you've done previously on your tooling that's gonna cause that. And so now I go right after that with a coat of my tan coat again. This is my final top coat. I don't let the antique dry. You can, it's not gonna hurt it after you buff it. If you wanna let it dry, you sure can. But what this is doing is, this is cleaning the area that we antiqued. After you get done buffing the antique out, you're gonna notice that it looks a little muddy. It looks just a little hazy, kind of just like a little dull. Your tooling doesn't look as vibrant. That's what, like this area here hasn't been hit with a tan coat yet. That's the purpose of that final coat of tan coat, is to go ahead and go over that with your top coat again. That's gonna wash and clean those top areas, those smooth areas. It's gonna get that antique that's hazing it up. It's gonna clean that off, and that's gonna give you that clean look. Now, if you're dealing with a project that has a lot of slick area in there, like say on this belt back here on this smooth end, you're gonna have to really wipe and be careful, stay on a clean portion of your little sheepskin pad, because you're gonna see a little bit more antique streaking in there, because you don't have anything to really hide that. With the tooling, it has places to go. And so we just work that top coat in there, making sure our border is nice and clean. The tops of our flowers are clean. And this is this is a step that many people skip. And they'll call with a question on why their antique looks so dirty, like why their belt looks, it looked better before I antiqued it. And a lot of times just they haven't done the last top coat step. The first time we use the tan coat, that's your resist step. This is your top coat. And so there you can see how you've got more contrast in that belt now than we did earlier. But there's not any big lops of antique that's gonna chance falling out or anything. And the belt looks clean. It doesn't look hazy, it doesn't look muddy. And so that's what we're after. So now we'll just let this sit. We're gonna let this dry and cure. I usually do this, I do a lot of my antiquing right before I go home that evening. That way all of this can dry. The thing you gotta remember is if you oil, antique, and all that, and do all your finish work, and then go ahead after it dries for say an hour, and then line it and sew it on the machine. The leather actually has some moisture in it now from all the different stuff we've put on there, all the different finishes we've put on there. So the leather's not cased by any means, but it is a little softer. So you're gonna get a little bit more machine marks on there. So my preference is, if I have the time, I will let this set till tomorrow, and we'll build the belt tomorrow as far as lining it, sewing it, and all that. It's gonna limit how much marks your machine is gonna have or leave, say with your presser foot, depending on the machine that you're using. The Cobra Class 26 is what we're gonna sew this on. Doesn't leave much marks at all. It's got a good pressure foot system on it. It's very, very good. But some other machines, their presser foot's a little bit more aggressive. So you wanna do that. Be sure you let them set overnight. Let that thing dry out really, really good. You'll see a lot less marks on your work after you sew it up. All right, guys, so we've gotten our belt antiqued and finished. I go ahead and do all my finish work on the belt blank before I go to line it or do anything else. I don't worry about my edges. I just get all my finish work done. If you are doing an unlined belt, just a quick note, if you're not gonna line it and you've got like a piece of 10, 12 ounce that you've tooled up and you're gonna antique and everything, a quick tip is put that blue painter's tape or something like that you can get off easily. Put that on the back whenever you do your finish work. That'll keep the back side of the belt clean, and that way you don't get any antique. don't care how hard you try, you're gonna get antique on the back side of that belt. So always put some tape on there. With this, I go ahead and wait to do the liner until I've gotten all of the finish work done, and I don't have to worry about the back of this belt because we're about to line it with a fresh, clean liner. All the finish work is done. We're good to go. All we've got to watch for now is not getting any glue on the liner. So we're gonna work on that. I've got a piece of 3-4 ounce lining material. If you buy our belt material packs, you're familiar with how we build belts. You get a strip of 910 Herman oak and a strip of 3-4 ounce Herman oak leather. This one's a little bit wider, so I cut my liners 1 3/4 inches wide for an 1.5 inch belt. That gives me just a little bit of feather on each side of the belt where we don't have to be as particular when we glue this up, as well as when we sew, it gives you a little bit more support to where if you want to sew really close to the edge, which I really don't recommend, but if you're going to sew a little bit close, you're not going to miss that liner. And so I always try to make them just a little bit wider. And like I said, this is an 1.5 inch belt, 1 3/4 liner. I'm going to go ahead and again on this one as well, I'm going to find my butt end versus my neck end. And so we're going to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and set this on here and leave me a little bit out the front, a little bit off the back side, and we'll just cut that liner off to length. So now this belt is ready to be glued up. Before we do that, we're gonna go ahead and thin down this bend side, okay, where it's gonna bend and we're gonna put our snaps. You need to thin this down. You can use a benchtop skiver like one of the Osborne pull skivers. You can use one of those if you'd like. I'm always nervous that at this point I've got quite a bit of time in this belt. I don't want to mess that up inside there. I've done them before. It works great. But for me, I've also had them cut through or cut too much off or something like that. So I prefer to do this by hand with a safety skiver. You do whatever you want to do, but we are going to thin this whole area down, about 7 inches of this bend area where the tooling is not, where our snaps are going to go. We're going to go ahead and thin that down. So let's go to the bench right quick and do that. All right, so we're here at the stone here. We're gonna do some skiving right here. I'm gonna go ahead and just add a little bit of water to that just to make that skiving a little bit easier and so that we have a little bit more control so we don't take too much off. This is gonna be a high wear spot where the buckle's gonna hang, so you don't wanna take it down too thin, but it needs to be thin enough where your snaps are gonna function properly, as well as that's gonna fold over nicely and not create a big old knot for the person that's wearing it. So we'll add a little bit of water. So now I'm just going to take my skiver and I'm just going to start taking off just a little bit. I'd probably say a little bit less than half the thickness is what I'm taking off, and then look at it and just see. And it might take you a few of these just to kind of get that dialed in on how much needs to come off. And like I said, you definitely use a bench skiver for this, but if a lot of people don't have one, I didn't have one for years, and so this is my preferred, because I can kind of control this a little easier. Now that looks about right. So you can see from where we're at right here to where we're at on this side. You just want enough so when that liner's on there, folds around, we still got a good thickness, but your snaps will also work. You've got to take into consideration the length of your snaps. Or if you're going to use Chicago screws, either way, you got to take that in consideration. And then also a good thing to remember is if you are doing a belt for a buckle set, so if it's got a keeper, a metal keeper that's decorated or something, you want to slide that on there. Make sure you're going to have enough distance after it's on here with the liner for the other end of this belt to pass through that as well. So that's something to consider if you are doing it for a custom buckle set like that. Okay, so we skived down our bend in, got our belt ready, got our liner ready. Go ahead and flip that over. We're going to do 2 coats. You could probably get by with 1, but I generally will do 2 coats on everything. And so we'll go ahead and glue this up, let that set, come back in, put a second coat, we'll be ready to glue this together. All right, so we've gotten our glue set up real good on here. It's nice and tacky. You just want to make sure it's not still wet. You want to make sure it's tacky. That way this belt will stick. We'll go ahead and start here on the bend end, and we'll just run this belt straight down the center of our liner. Now you'll notice we did keep the paper in there, so that poster board does stay in the belt. That's going to offer a little bit more body to the belt and also prevent some stretch over time, just natural stretch. So not only the stretch when we're tooling, but also the stretch when you're wearing the belt. It'll kind of cut some of that down. I've had many customers tell me that they're still wearing the belt in the exact same hole that we made it for. It hasn't stretched on them. A lot of times the belt will stretch on you, and you have to kind of move to a different spot on the belt with your buckle because the belt's stretched. And so that paper does help with that. So some people don't like to leave that in. They like to use tape. That's fine too. I just prefer to use the paper. So now we're just going to take our stitch groover. You don't have to groove. We say that in every video, but you don't have to if you don't want to. I prefer the look of the groove, and so that's what we do in the shop. And I'm just using I don't even know, so we have a video out on essential tools for the beginner craftsman, and I tried to find this stitch groover because this is one I've had for years and years. Used to have 3 or 4 of them in the shop for guys to use on smaller projects because our bigger groover makes too big a groove for this smaller type work. And I went on, and this is from Tandy, but I went on there, couldn't find it. They only had one groover on there that they sold that I found at that time. So, but any little groover, Versa groover is a really good one that's out too. What you want to do is just check, make sure you're in the middle of your border line, and then we'll just begin going along there. Now I will set my groove on most of the time on belts. I will set it to where that groove line is just inside of center in that border, whatever your border width is. I want to come just a little off center, just a little bit more towards the middle. That way I've got a little bit more room here for my edger. We're going to go in with a number 3 edger after we sew it. And I want to have enough stitch relief there to where I'm not going to get into my stitches, but I can get a nice rolled edge. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like I said, if you don't want to groove it, you'll just set your gauge on your machine to that same type of stitch relief and then sew the belt up. All right, so our belt's ready to go. Got the liner glued on. Everything's ready to go. We'll step over to the class 26 and go ahead and sew this up. All right, so we're gonna sew this up on the class 26, and you could also sew this on a 18, a 20, any of those machines from Leather Machine Co. You could also sew it on the class 4. I used to sew a lot of belts on the class 4. I would just drop my needle size down and I would sew it with 207 thread. This machine in particular is set up with a size 22 needle and 138 thread. So that's what we're running, and I'm running natural color in it today. And so that's what we're gonna sew this up with. But like I said, any machine, that's kind of, you know, kind of look there and see which one you have or which one you want to do. But that's the system that I'm using today. I'm gonna work real hard to stay right in my groove. That's one bonus to not grooving it, is you can use your guide and not worry about staying in the groove. All right, so we got our belt sewn up. Everything's sewed good. Machine, you always want to check the back side of your belts. Check the back side of your stitching. Make sure that it's stitching well and you don't have any bobbin showing back there or anything like that, just in case. We'll cut these excess stitches off, and then we're just going to take our blade here, any blade that you'd prefer to use, however you'd like to do it, and we'll just trim off this liner all the way around. Be careful to stay flush with the body of your belt. Don't get into that. And we'll get this all trimmed, and then we'll carry it over to the sander and sand it. Okay, so we got our edges sanded. You see how smooth that is right there. Now you can certainly go through with different grits and using a sanding block and go ahead and sand this down and get it just how you want it. I find that grit of paper that I have on that machine back there, it's just a cabinet finisher. Works really good for the majority of the edges that we do. Cobra also sells a little sander that looks like a little bench grinder. That works really good, but also doing them by hand is fine, just takes a little more time. So now we'll take a number 3. This is a number 3 Ron's edger. It's a round bottom edger. I really like these edgers for this kind of stuff, but we'll just go ahead. Number 3 is just about right on this belt here, and we've got a nice sharp edge on this edger. And we'll just go through and edge this belt. So now we've got our edging done. Now we're ready to slick our edges. I've got a video showing how we do this, but goes a little bit more in depth. But anyway, we're just using water and some glycerin saddle soap bar. That's what this yellow is. We just put a little bit of soap on there, more water than soap. And then we're just going to rub that with our canvas. And get a good burnish on those edges. And you can use a solution like Tokonol, or you can use some Martin's Mix. There's a lot of solutions out there for edging, edge burnishing. I find that the soap and water works just well enough for us. I really like the edge that it gives. I'm not a big fan of Tokonol on veg tan leather. I don't feel like it does near as good a job as what we're doing right here, but it does work very well on chrome tan leathers or any finished type bag leathers and things. It does do a really good job there, where this does not do a good job. So that's just kind of the way I do use Tokonol, but I use it on more of the bag type leathers, not on veg. But there you can see that edge there, and we'll just do this entire belt, and then we'll set the belt over to the side and we'll let those edges dry real good, and then we'll come back and dye them. So I'm going to give this belt a good 2 or 3 hours, just let them edges dry real good, and then we'll come in and dye them. I prefer to dye my edges after they're slicked. Use a lot less dye that way, and it's a lot easier to get the dye only where you want it. So we'll get this belt slicked, and then we'll meet back up when we're ready to dye edges. All right, so we've let this belt dry. The edges are nice and dry. They're not wet anymore. You can, in a pinch, you can dye them while they're a little damp. If you're in a hurry or trying to, get to the post office to get it out that day or something, you can do that, but you need to be real careful because it will come off a little bit easier. So I like to let them dry so that dye is going to soak in. Now I'm going to use one of these dye pens. I'm sure many of y'all have seen these and probably purchased them. I think you can get them on Amazon. You get them at Maker's Leather Supply. But they just got a felt tip. You fill them with whatever color dye you want, and then you can just push it down a little bit. Be careful, don't push too much, because once you get this kind of overflowing, it'll drip. So I always try to do it off the side. I don't want a chance at dripping on my project if it does decide to do that. But these are pretty handy. I generally will use just a dauber. It's what I used in the original video, and a lot of my dye work you'll see me just use a dauber. But I do like these pens just for speed, and it's a lot less wasteful. A lot of times I'll leave that dye in that little cup and it kind of goes to waste because I leave it out. But we just want to apply enough dye right along our edge where we hit it with the edger. Be real careful not to get off of your edge. And I'm just using Fibing's Pro dye. Used to be called Pro Oil dye, but that's just what I use. But any dye that you want to use is fine. Now, if you'll notice, the angle that I'm holding this is I'm trying to get basically the top half of the round of our edge. So I'm not worried too much about the bottom right here because I can't see it. So I'm just mainly focusing on the top and on the edge right here. So that's just getting half of our rounded edge basically. So now I will turn the belt over. So as you can see right there, we really haven't gotten the bottom part of the edge. I do it that way in pieces so that I can be sure that the inside of it looks just as clean and just as precise as the back side. So I do mine in halves. I do the top half and then I'll turn it over and do the bottom half. I do that on pretty much everything. Just ensures that I can get that just where I want it. Okay, so there's our edge. Our edge has been dyed now. I'm gonna let this set for just a minute, and then I'm using a dark brown dye here on this belt. I usually try to coordinate I use dark brown antique, so I'm gonna use dark brown edge dye. You could definitely do black or something like that if you want to. But here I use the dark brown, and sometimes with that on the edges, you'll need to go over it again if you want it a little bit darker. And it's not so transparent. This right here, one coat sometimes isn't quite enough with the brown. Black's usually fine, but brown sometimes we'll go over it again. So I'm gonna let this set for just a few minutes and then I'll probably go over it again, and then we'll be ready to put a finish coat on these edges and then get the snaps put in. All right, so we've let our edges dry just a little bit. Just want to make sure it's not wiping off on your hands. Make sure that you're not getting any rub off on your dye, especially black. Black is really bad about that, so this is going to be an important step. Now, what I like to do is just dress these edges with a little bit of tan coat. That's just going to give them that little bit of shine and go ahead and seal those edges now that they're slicked and dyed. Where I like to begin is on the back, and the reason is because our pad, if there is going to be any rub off from the dye, there's none on this pad just yet. So I want to catch that liner. Since we haven't put anything on the liner yet, I want to go ahead and catch that first. And then if we do get a little streak from any kind of dye rub off, it should lift up because it'll be on the finish and not on the leather. So we're gonna go ahead and just give that back liner a good wipe down with tan coat or whatever top coat that you're gonna use. Gonna give that a good wipe there. And then we're gonna do the front one more time just for good measure. Just a nice little light coat to freshen that belt up. And now I'll run that pad down my edges like so. And that's just going to give those edges a little bit of shine. Make sure we don't have any puddling of your tan coat anywhere. And so now on that belt you can see the edges there, how they've got just a little bit of finish and shine to them. And so that's right there, that's done. That belt is ready to go. The only thing we lack now is to put our 1-inch bag punch in here and to put our snaps. And we'll do that after this dries. I'm gonna let this sit out and just kind of air dry just for a few minutes. Make sure it's not tacky, and then we'll go ahead and put our snaps in. Okay, so our belt has had a chance to kind of air dry a little bit. So what we're gonna do is, remember our fold length, which is 3.5. So we'll put a mark right there at 3.5 on this bend end, and then we're going to use a 1-inch bag slot. You can use whatever size you want, but I find a 1-inch works very well on belts, what we've always used. So you just want to be sure that's centered up, and we'll just punch through that, and that puts our slot in there. Now I put a slot in every belt that I build. Some of the trophy buckles, they just have a hanger. They don't really have a tongue or anything. Some of the hangers have a little nub in there that sits right there in the center, but I go ahead and put a slot in there, and that way it's there if they ever want to use a heel type buckle or something like that on the belt. So then we're going to take a number 5 hole punch, and all we're going to do is just go ahead and fold this bend. Now you want to be real careful when you're doing this. If you're folding this around, and sometimes this leather will be a little dry and it might try to crack right there. So I don't hammer this down. I've hammered them down before, and you'll get some surface cracking or some grain cracking in there. So you don't want to do that. If you can help it, just kind of squeeze that down a little bit. Let that break in naturally over time. Or if you are going to hammer that down and you want that nice and flat, be sure and add some water to this before you do it, and still be careful, because I have had that leather be a little dry and you'll get the grain cracking through there. I just fold that over where it's even. I just hold mine. You can make a pattern or a template or use our belt jig. We do have a belt jig available that makes all these holes for you, or allows you to mark all these holes. But I just usually eyeball mine. I want to leave these two snaps with enough space in between them here to where you can get any size keeper in there. So if they ever did want to use a keeper, you want to be sure you got enough distance in between there so those snaps will set comfortably without trying to pop loose. And so now we've got all 4 holes for our snaps. I'm going to use these here, which are, I think they're called a Sigma snap. It's just a little belt snap. I get these at Weaver Leather. And it's got a, you know, these two here go together, and then these two here. It's just a very simple, very common belt snap. And so we'll put that there. And on the button side, I've got to make that number 5 is just a tick small for the bigger side here, where that snap button goes. So then we've got a little anvil. We've got our button. Put that button right on that snap. You got to kind of hold it. It doesn't really click on or anything like that. You just got to hold it. And then your setter, if you buy a set of snap setters, they should come with all the proper anvils and drivers. And this one driver here has got a little nub on it that is the exact right size for one of those snaps. So that's going to hold that. As you compress that, it's going to keep that hole open just the right amount so that the snap will function correctly. So we'll do the other side. You don't want to beat them to death, but you want to get a good set on those so that they don't pop off. Okay. And then we'll take our other side, which is the longer post. And now we'll take this other anvil. And the button, the little button goes into one of the holes on this little bar anvil here. And so it should be the proper size for the snap you're setting. And then I just take the male end, put that right in that button. Take our other driver, which is just a domer, smaller domer, and set that side. And you'll hear it click out of there because it's maintaining the shape of this button while you set it so that you don't squash it down. Because if you squash it or misshape it, it's no longer going to set like it should. So that's the purpose of the anvils. Okay. And now we'll take those snaps. I like to preset mine or test them. Obviously we're going to snap them shut, but I like to go in and test them, so I'll snap them closed just like that, and then I like to pop it loose and see, make sure. Sometimes if you don't get these two set real well, that button will pop off, and I'd rather have it do it on me in the shop. That way I can immediately replace it with another snap than have it happen to them first couple times they wear the belt, and then they don't know how to do that, you know, and replace it, then they got to come back to the shop. So I usually open it and close it 2 or 3 times, make sure that, because usually if they're going to pop off, they'll usually pop off that first 2 or 3 functions there because you just didn't get it seated well. And so that's our snap end. Everything's good to go. Now on this end here, I went ahead and grabbed our belt jig for you guys. I'm going to show you all that. This jig is probably hard to see in the video, but it's got this 1 3/4 is the one most people will get because it'll go ahead and do the tapers for you if you're doing an 1 3/4 taper to 1 1/2 inch, which is what I would recommend if you are doing a wider belt. But you can also use it just on your 1 1/2 belts because all the spacing of everything is exactly the same on either belt. So it's got a spot where your 1 inch back punch would go, as well as your snap holes in there already. It's also got the end holes here with our 7-inch tip. Has a little bit of information on it on how to find that measurement and that kind of thing. But really handy little jig. So what we'll do is we'll just set that down, set our jig on top of our belt, line that up. Like I said, we are doing a 7-inch tip on this belt. So if you were doing an 8-inch, you would just move it back 1 inch. And then I'll just make a hole with my scratch awl that I can see on each one of those. So the middle hole is 7 inches from the tip, and then we have 2 holes 1 inch apart, 2 going back this way and 2 going back that way. So that gives you 5 total for a little bit of adjustment on the belt. And then we'll take our number 5 hole punch. Be sure it's in the center of the belt. And just punch right through. And so you can see there where our holes are. And like I said, if we check that measurement from center, it's 7 inches. From the bend to the center hole is 36 inches. So that is the size belt we were making. That's the size belt that it is. So this belt here is completely ready to go. It's ready to be shipped or photographed or hung on your belt rack, whatever you're wanting to do. At that point, that belt's ready to roll. All right, guys, so that's building a custom belt. Like I said, we've done a video like this before in the past, many years ago, and it was a great video. A lot of people got a lot out of it. I love building belts. I think they're a great project. We've built a lot of belts in our career, and they're just a great item for gifts or anything else. A lot of customers will want to get a belt made. That's a very common request if they know you do leather work. We thought it'd be a good idea to go ahead and revisit that video just because it's been so long. If you notice in the video, if you watch the first one that we did years ago, we didn't really change a whole lot. There's not a lot in my process that's changed over the years, so I pretty much build them exactly the same way because we've done so many of them. I've kind of got a little system down and a process on how we do those. But I think it's important to just kind of revisit that. A lot of folks on this channel are new here and maybe haven't dived in far enough to find that video or just haven't run across it yet, but got some questions on belts or sizing or anything else. So I just wanted to kind of revisit that, build another belt. We've got some belts we're building. Be a lot of fun. Plus, while we're building belts here in the shop, we now have the belt book. So you saw me use that for the floral pattern in many, many videos. You've seen me just draw directly onto the leather, and that is the bulk of what I do. But now having this in the shop, occasionally somebody wants a belt that I've already done, or they want a pattern that's specific to a certain saddle I've done or something like that. If I've already drawn up a pattern, there's no reason to draw another one. We can use that and still alter it and personalize it and make it kind of one for them. But the belt pattern book is the first of our belt books that we've come out with. It's got a variety of different tooling patterns in here, some information on sizing, but it's also the good thing about this too that I've gotten a lot of good feedback on is that we do have a photo along with the line art that shows you kind of a tooled leather panel with those patterns, so you can kind of see what I did. And by no means should you let that kind of limit your decisions creatively, but just to kind of show you kind of how I approached the pattern and what I did, kind of gives you that. It's also got 1.5 inch and 1.75 inch patterns in here, so if you're doing multiple, different size belts and things, as well as these billet patterns in here. This will just help if you're doing Ranger belts for tooling the little billets on there if you want to, or if you're doing a tapered belt, it'll kind of give you something that you can decorate the tapered portion of that belt for the one that you're making if it is a tapered belt. We also have the belt jig. You did not see me use this a whole lot in the video, but this jig has been out. It's an acrylic template jig that I've had in the shop forever, just made out of a piece of leather, but I went ahead and made it into acrylic a few years ago, and this has been a very popular item. It's a great tool in the shop, especially if you do a lot of belts. It's going to kind of just speed up the process. You don't have to pull your tape measure out every time to mark your holes or anything like that, and you'll get a little bit more consistency. So if you're wanting either one of those items, we do have those in our online store. We'll have links down in the description for those, and you can certainly go there and get those. While you're there, be sure and sign up for the Leathercraft newsletter. That's where you can stay connected with us and get notified of new videos, new products, new things that are coming out, or just catch up with us on what's going on in the shop, where we're headed next, and that kind of thing. I really appreciate you guys watching. I hope you got something out of the video, and we'll see y'all in the next project video.